Hi, and welcome to today's Mindset. I have Doug Noll here with me. Doug, you welcome to the Mindset podcast. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Daniel. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. Before we get into it, I do want to go into your background a little bit because I do think it prefaces the conversation that we're going to have, and it's extremely important for the viewers to really understand how much experience and knowledge you have based on what you've done. So, award-winning author, speaker, and trainer. After 20 years, so you were for 22 years you were a trial lawyer. You became a peacemaker and mediator. Today, Doug helps people solve deep and intricate conflicts and teaches others to do what he does. Mr. Noll is an adjunct professor of law at the Pepperdine School of Law Strauss Institute, where you teach decision making under uncertainty conflict, which sounds extremely interesting to get into. So I'm excited about that. You're also the co-founder of an award-winning prisoner and of Peace Project, in which you teach murderers in maximum security prisons to be peacemakers and mediators. That's got to be an obstacle in and of itself. And you've trained mediators and leaders in Europe, Middle East, Asia, and in your innovative peacemaking in mediation process. You have helped mediate 1,500 disputes, including sexual abuse cases and criminal victim offering cases. I love this. You're an honor. Honors include California Lawyer Magazine Attorney of the Year, a proposed Prize Fellow, and Best Lawyer of America Lawyer of the Year award. You recently, in September 2017, came out with a book called De-Escalate: How to Calm an Angry Person in 90 Seconds or Less. That sounds like an important characteristic to have. Personally speaking, you're a jazz violinist, so I speak to that. I've played violin since I was 3, so I'm excited hopefully get into that conversation. Aircraft and
Sure.
helicopter pad pilot, ski instructor, second degree black belt, Tai Chi master, whitewater rafter, and you're currently residing with your wife in Yosemite National Park. So, first question I always go is, how have you managed in such a short period of your life to accomplish so much?
I haven't owned a television set in 40 years.
Okay. Step one, don't own a television
That's it,
set. Got it.
right there. I think people consume an average of 4 to 8 hours of television a day.
hmm
Imagine what you can do if you take that time and put it to something else.
So, it's easier said than done, right? I mean, obviously, you have this very,
Not for me, but
not for you. I mean,
well,
you have this ability, I guess, to manage and really hold yourself accountable. What
yes.
what is it about life, I guess, and that has gotten you to be, so determined to be so successful and bring so much value to the world?
Well, of course it's an evolution, but I was born not too far from where you are right now in San Marino, California. And so I'm a native Californian. And I was born with a lot of disabilities. I was born crippled, partially blind, partially deaf, left-handed, bad teeth. I mean, a lot of problems. And in those days, in the 50s, people didn't know how to deal with children like myself. So I had a pretty rough, although I grew up in affluence and privilege, I had a pretty rough emotional childhood.
Right.
And I just had to learn how to deal with all this pain and challenge and difficulty. And so over a long, long, long time period, I basically learned how to teach myself stuff. And now I know how I learn. And I'm a slow learner. I'm a smart guy, but I'm a pretty slow learner. It takes me, but once I get it, I've really got it. I'm a master.
hmm
So, and so that's kind of how I developed those skills initially. And then after that, it's just a function of what am I interested in? What do I want to master? And, I've learned that I can master anything I want if I'm willing to put the time and effort into it. And that's the secret. One of the problems I think we have in our culture is that adult learners are afraid of learning new things because they don't like being incompetent. I can't tell you how many classical violinists I've met who are afraid to take up jazz because you have to start all over again. There's nothing in classical violin that trains you other
Translates,
than
right?
the technical stuff that teaches you how to improvise.
hmm
And you're starting from scratch. And people who have worked their way up through the musical world and the great classical technical players, the idea of starting all over again is just
Scary.
too hard.
Yeah.
It's too hard, and there's a lot of fear involved. That's the other thing is you've got to have a lot of courage. You've got to have the beginner. I always try to be a beginner at something. Always that humble place of not knowing, and being a beginner, and having the courage to make mistakes and tell people I'm a beginner and I'm not very good at this, even at my age. And I think that's a great attitude to have, and you can accomplish a lot. I mean, I've had 5 lifetimes so far
I
in
mean,
this
it
lifetime.
sounds like it between all that you've accomplished. And so, as far as law and what got you into law, what made you decide that law is kind of the path that maybe you wanted to start or really engage in becoming who you are now?
Well, I graduated from Dartmouth College in 1973, and in those days, if you didn't go to med school, you went to law school. So, so it was default, right? I didn't want to live in, I'd had enough in New England, right? 4 years, I'm a California boy. So 4 years in New England was enough. So I came back to California and I went to law school. Really not, I didn't have any great passion to be a lawyer. I just wanted to strengthen my critical thinking skills. And I thought law school was a really good place to do that.
Ah,
And I did well in law school academically and law review and all that kind of stuff. And in those days, it was just sort of everything was by default and inertia. So I graduated from law school, worked for clerk for a judge for a year, passed the bar. Okay, I got to get a job. Who's going to hire me? But the firm that hired me I started private practice in 1978. They groomed me to be a big-time trial lawyer. I joined that firm in September of 1978 and tried my first civil jury trial in November of 1978. And
wow, that's a
my
quick
second
turnover.
case, oh yeah, and my second case was co-chairing the defense of a $36 million securities fraud case in San Diego. I told you I know about the 405.
Yeah, you pointed it
The
out as soon as you saw it.
405. And so that's how my career started. And for the next 22 years, I was a trial dog and tried, I don't even know how many cases I tried, a lot. And then things happened. My life shifted.
So what were some of the skills that you think that you learned as a lawyer that you translated to what you're doing now or to professionals?
Well, I think mostly it's critical thinking and being able to write clearly and analyze problems. And I can analyze complex problems quickly and I can take really complex concepts and simplify them and to teach them to other people.
Okay.
Uh, and I mean, that's a skill you have to have in the work I did as a trial lawyer, because I was always engaged in these very difficult, high stakes, complex cases. And how do you take these complex business problems and teach a jury of 12 people or 6 people in those days in federal court what this is all about and make it meaningful for them. So learning how to distill and integrate was really important, probably the most important skill that I developed that I still use today.
Interesting. So what possessed you, I guess, in a sense, because you're as a lawyer, you're probably doing fairly well, hopefully
Oh yeah.
financially, you've got it all coming, and you decided to go Peacemaker. What was, if there was any kind of triggering effect, what was the event that occurred that made you decide, you want to go a little bit more of a different route?
It was a 15-year journey. Starting in the mid 1980s, I took up the martial arts.
Hmm.
And eventually I was awarded my second degree black belt. And after that, my teacher called me and fired me. He said, "You're an asshole. You're too aggressive. You're going to hurt somebody. I'm not going to teach you anymore." Really, until you learn Tai Chi. So I started studying Tai Chi, which is the oldest of all martial arts. And also, contrary to popular understanding, it is the most vicious martial art I've ever studied. I mean, it's deadly. And I studied it as a martial art, not as a contemplative practice. Well, Tai Chi has 2 very interesting paradoxes. The first is the softer you are, the stronger you are.
Okay.
The second is the more vulnerable you are, the more powerful you are. Soft to be strong, vulnerable to be powerful. I did not get this. I was a warrior, hardcore warrior in every way you can imagine. But these paradoxes soaked into my soul until one day in the mid-90s, I was trying a case, and the thought came to me, what the hell am I doing in here? And after that trial, I had a river trip planned with a bunch of friends, and we went up and ran the Maine salmon. And I spent 10 days on my raft all by myself, just thinking about how many people I'd served as a trial lawyer, and concluded that I had only really served 5 people in 22 years. Well, at that time, it had been about 20 years. And I said, I'm not going to do this anymore. I don't want to go another 30 years and only serve 15 people. So I came back, drove down out of the mountains from my home to my office, and on that drive, that fateful Monday, I heard the one and only public service announcement on our local NPR station for a new master's degree program in peacemaking and conflict studies.
Wow.
And it caught my attention at Fresno Pacific University. And ultimately, I enrolled, and it changed my life. These guys, my mentors, world-class professors and leaders in the restorative justice field, trained me and over the next 2.5 years, and completely changed my life. And that's how it changed. And I had many discussions with my partners about the fact that I wanted to do a problem-solving practice. I didn't want to try cases anymore, and some of them were open to the idea, some of them were horrified, some of them were pissed because the gravy train would come to an end, because I was supporting 2 or 3 people in the law firm, and I mean, I was the second biggest earner in the firm. And finally, it came to a head, and I just walked out. I gave notice at the end of October of 2000, 1 week's notice, and I'm done. Walked away from $10 million and opened my own peacemaking and mediation practice on November 1st, 2000.
So, and this is is this the Prison of Peace project that you're referring to?
So no, the Prison of Peace project happened 10 years later.
Oh, wow. Okay. So
What
we're
happened in
jumping
between 2000 and 2010? So in 2009, my colleague, Laurel Coffer, dear friend, who lives up in Calabasas and is a mediator and, like me, an adjunct at Pepperdine Law, called me to read a letter that she'd received from a woman serving a life sentence without possibility of parole in what was then the largest, most violent women's prison in the world, which happened to be about an hour from where I lived.
Okay.
And she read me the letter, and basically this woman, Susan Russo, was asking whether Laurel would be willing to come in and teach the networking group, which is a group of about 100 women serving life sentences, to be peacemakers and mediators to stop the prison violence, because they're living in this community, they don't want the violence. And Laurel said, what do you think? And I think we should do this. So that's how that journey began. And we started training these women, 15 in April of 2010, and up until the pandemic hit, we had expanded into 15 California prisons, 12 prisons in Greece, a prison in Connecticut, and startups in northern Italy and in Nairobi, Kenya. Wow. Then the pandemic hit. Of course, that shut down. We had to go to distance programming, but we took the grant money that we had, and we've spent the last year filming our entire curriculum. And we're now in post-production, and by probably the mid to end of summer, we'll be able to offer Prison of Peace anywhere in the world. We'll be able to subtitle it and offer it anywhere. Yeah.
That's amazing. The journey it sounds like you had to go through to accomplish such a large project seems something that's the 1 in a billion lifetimes.
Well, when I said yes, I kind of had a sinking feeling that this might be a little bigger than I'm imagining.
Anticipated initially.
but it did turn out. But now we have got a staff of 15, and we just got another round of grants from the state of California, another $1 million in grants. They love the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation loves our programming. We've I'd say 3,000 or 4,000 of our students have been released on parole. Not one of them is reoffended.
Wow.
0 recidivism after taking our courses.
It sounds like they need to take this and implement this in all the prisons pretty quickly.
Well, that's the intention with the filming of the curriculum.
Wow. So, I mean, if you could take, and I'm sure they have this cheesy line, if I could do it, anybody could do it. If you could take a prisoner and turn them into a peacemaker, I'm sure there are certain characteristics that you have acknowledged that allow someone to be able to de-escalate. Because from what I've done a little bit, the de-escalation and being able to de-escalate someone in 90 seconds, right? There's a lot of overlap. So, can you maybe speak on some of the characteristics so just so Doug, for us, we have a lot of professionals who work or who are listening to our podcast, right? Real estate agents and those that surround them. And overcoming objections is one of the most, you know, frustrating or difficult concepts. And quite frankly, in my belief, it's a skill. It's a skill that you can really teach anybody. And it all starts with what we call acknowledge, repeat, right? You've got the acknowledge, you've got the repeat. Let's bring down their defenses. In a sense, it's kind of like de-escalation. But for me, it sounds like on your side, there's a much larger, I guess, it's a much more intense de-escalation that needs to occur to bring someone who's been to prison and turn them into a peacemaker. So what are maybe some of the characteristics that you've identified that would make someone a good peacemaker?
Anybody can do it. This, what I've learned and what I've developed, and what neuroscience, brain scanning studies have now shown why it works the way that it does. It's the foundational skill of life. If you're in sales or you're in the people business like you are with set schedule in your company, working with real estate people, this is a skill that every single person that works with people needs to have, because it's not just about de-escalating. It's actually turns out to be much deeper than that. Okay. It's about validating human beings as they are. And when you validate somebody at the deep level that you can once you master these skills, they will follow you off a cliff. They will be loyal patrons of you for the rest of their life. If they're your followers in an organization, you will become the leader that everybody wants to follow. Mm-hmm. If you are a real estate broker or agent and you do this to your clients, they will refer business to you like crazy because they feel so good working with you. So it turns out that the basic skill I developed in 2005, and then the first brain scanning studies came out of UCLA in 2007 out of Lieberman's lab. And then because it was so powerful, we made it one of the foundational skills in the Prison of Peace project, where we were able to acid test it over the last 12 years, teaching some pretty rough people how to become peacemakers. And the thing that happens when you start practicing these skills is you're going to change as a human being. Mm-hmm. You're going to become more authentic. You're going to become more self-aware. You're going to be able to regulate your emotions better. You're going to get in touch with your humanity in a way that you've never been before, and it will change you as a human being, as it has the thousands and thousands of people we've trained in our incarcerated populations. So it's pretty powerful.
So you have this concept of emotional, I believe you phrase it as emotional invalidation. Is that the overlap, or is this kind of
the opposite
of what you were talking, right? The validation on one side and the emotional invalidation. So do you tend to find a lot of the people that you work with have a lot of issues with controlling emotional invalidation?
Oh my God.
I mean, I always want to say I'm right, you're wrong, right? It's just always the common nature.
Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
You're 2 years old. Remember when you were 2 years old? You're out running around and you fall down and you skin your knee and you start to bleed a little bit and you start to cry. What were you told?
It's okay. You're good.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, or be tough, be a man. Big men don't cry. Don't be a sissy.
I guess it depends if it's your mom or your dad who comes in and
did you
pulls you up.
Did you get any of that?
Yeah.
Then you were emotionally invalidated. That's emotional invalidation. You as a child, right at about 18 months of age, the emotional centers of the brain start to come online. We're not born with emotions. We have to create emotions. Okay. We create emotions with affect. And so to learn emotions, we have to have all these affective experience, and then we have to put words to them and create a database of words to feelings and
association.
I get a lot more complex than we need to get here.
Okay.
But what parents are supposed to do they're supposed to be emotional coaches. They're supposed to help their children master emotional competency. But because parents are emotionally incompetent themselves, they can't do that. So they invalidate, because when a child becomes emotional, it creates anxiety in the parent. And so what does the parent want to do unconsciously is, shut up, you're making me feel anxious, and I don't want to feel anxious, so stop feeling the way you're feeling. Every parent does this. It's not because they don't love a child, it's because they don't know any better. And it's the cause of everything wrong we see in our society. It really is. I mean, every single inmate that I've ever worked with has suffered from horrible abuse in their homes. Horrible abuse. And all of it invalidating. There's a study out of San Diego called the ACEs study, Adverse Childhood Experiences study, that correlates emotional abuse of the type that I'm talking about.
Okay.
Not the horrible head-banging, child-battering kind of abuse, but just emotional abuse with comorbid outcomes later in life of cancer, diabetes,
Oh, wow.
chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. I mean, you name the disease, and there's a direct relationship to how much emotional abuse the child got later on. And Kaiser, of course, is interested in this because their model is keeping people out of their hospitals. And so they did this huge study to see the relationship between childhood experiences and later medical comorbidity. And what they found astounded them. I mean, the relationship is direct and clear, and it's much, much stronger than anybody ever thought. So what's the antidote to emotional invalidation? What's the opposite? Validate the emotions. So instead of saying toughen up and don't be a sissy and don't be a girly girl, your appropriate emotional coach would say something like, "Oh, Daniel, that you're really hurting and you're a little scared and you're frightened and you're anxious and you feel a little embarrassed." And by using those emotional words to that 2 or 3-year-old, that child is learning how to associate the affective experience it's having, which are many of them, multiple things, with emotional words that then create this database. Now, what happens when people get into conflict or they get upset or angry is that they don't have good emotional skills, so their prefrontal cortex can be overwhelmed by their emotional centers very quickly and very easily. Once the prefrontal cortex loses contact with the database, it just goes offline, shuts down the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. Now the emotional centers are dominating everything, and the only thing a human being can rely on for behavior is reactive programming, stuff that we learned in childhood. So that's why you see a 40-year-old with being angry. Oh, he's acting like a 6-year-old. Well, it's because he is 6-year-olds in that moment.
So there's this concept my mom used to always has talked to me about. Is called your inner child, and it seems like there's a lot of
there's a lot of overlap
between what you were talking about and this.
I kind of like the inner child work because it talks a lot about how we have arrested development because of this emotional invalidation that we all suffer, and we all go through it. 98% of all families are emotionally dysfunctional. They're not going to produce emotionally competent adults. They're going to produce emotionally incompetent adults. And this work is, I mean, look at the work of Gordon Neufeld up in Vancouver, BC, and other people like him that look at all this and just show how upbringing is so critical to functionality in adulthood. Now, the cool thing is, what I've learned both working inside and outside of prisons, whether I'm working in a corporate boardroom or a family business conflict or wherever, teaching, is that when you start learning how to de-escalate another person by reflecting back their emotional experience, your own brain is reprogrammed at the same time.
Interesting.
And you can very quickly overcome a lot of this dysfunction that you inherited from your parents by simply practicing what we call affect labeling, or emotional reflection on other people. And I know what happened for me. The way I discovered it is I discovered this stuff, and I just all of a sudden started to recognize I changed it. And then I started seeing the change when we started the prison project. I saw these incredible changes in these very harsh people in about 4 to 6 weeks. I mean, they changed from our first 15 women. I'll never forget this. They were black thorns, shut down, angry, mean, most of them violent. 6 weeks later, they were beautiful roses. They'd gotten in touch with their humanity and their emotions, and they were completely changed as human beings. And of the 15, I think all but 2 or 3 have been released. And these were all lifers.
Wow, that's amazing. There's a lot to digest in what you said in the last couple minutes, and I think what I've gained from this is one, obviously there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and that never stops, but so what I love about these interviews is there's sometimes there's association from what I've learned, but the perspective that you bring kind of simplifies it for me, where I have a better understanding of not necessarily the steps, but I can now at least acknowledge where I'm having this inner child and these inner thoughts come from. So I've acknowledged it. Now, what are the steps that I can be taking, or what is the thought process or the mindset that I should be taking in order to start to maybe take the right steps in resolving or, again, identifying this?
So there are three steps to this process,
Okay.
which I'm perfectly happy to talk about. Step number one: when you're confronted with an emotional, angry person, the first step is to ignore the angry words.
Okay.
Those words have no meaning to you, so just ignore them. That way, you won't get triggered, and it'll free up bandwidth. And by the way, only 7% of a human communication is made up with verbal content. The rest is all nonverbal, and you want to pay attention to the nonverbal, not the verbal. And there's a whole basis for that in evolutionary biology, which is absolutely fascinating. The second step is to allow your brain to do what it is evolved to do, which is to read the emotions of another person rapidly and extremely exquisitely accurately.
Okay.
And we don't use this skill because our society has been built on a lie over 4,000 years that human beings are rational. We are not rational. We're 98% emotional and only 2% rational. There is no such thing as a rational human being. We have tiny moments of rationality. Every decision we make is an emotional decision. You should know this in the real estate business. Every decision is emotional. There's no such thing as an unemotional decision. Even Einstein said that he never came up with one of his brilliant ideas through rational thinking.
That's what makes us
It was
human.
all intuition and emotion.
Okay.
So we have this amazing innate ability that we don't use to read the emotional data fields of other people. And emotions are data, just like numbers on a spreadsheet. You just have to know how to read it and interpret it. And so the way you do it is you just you stand in silence. You're there, present in silence with this upset emotional person. Empty your mind and let your brain do the work. And within a second or two, emotions will start popping into your head. You'll start saying angry, frustrated. And then the third step is to reflect back the emotional experience that this angry person is having back to them with a you statement. So I might say something like, David or Daniel, you are really angry. You're really frustrated. Nobody's listening to you. You don't feel heard. You don't feel supported or appreciated. You feel like you've been treated unfairly. The thing's just really pissing you off. And you're anxious and worried and concerned. And you're a little sad because you feel abandoned and betrayed. And you really don't feel like you fit in. And it's a little embarrassing. And all of this just makes you so mad. So I'm just labeling the emotions that you would be having. And the thing to remember is that when somebody is angry, for example, it's not just anger. There are at least 6 to 8 other emotions that are going on at the same time. And emotions never come one at a time. They come in clusters. And so what we want to do is develop the skill of seeing what other emotions are there. I teach that there are 6 layers of emotions, and once you learn what these layers are, then it becomes very easy to diagnose and analyze what's going on. And you do this 3-step process until you get 4 things, four involuntary, unconscious responses from the person you're validating. Number 1, they nod their head. Number 2, they say, yeah, like that. Number 3, their shoulders drop. And number 4, you get a big sigh of relief. Mm-hmm. And those are involuntary relaxation responses that shows you that the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex has come back online, and the emotional centers of the brain, primarily the amygdala, have been inhibited. And now people are back in control of what's going on. Works every time, without fail. It'll work on any human being on the planet. Doesn't matter your culture, it doesn't matter where you live, because the human brain is hardwired the same way everywhere.
So I might be wrong when I say I've tried to use that in the past, and all I've done is gotten the person more agitated.
All right, if you used an I statement, if you said something like, gee, what I hear you say, what I think you're feeling is you're angry, which is the old active listening BS that Thomas Gordon developed in the 1950s. Mm-hmm.
That won't work.
It never has worked. It never will work. It doesn't work. All it does is get people angry. When you reflect back with a you statement, it's completely different. It seems counterintuitive and counternormative. It seems patronizing and rude and weird. But when you reflect back with a you statement, the listener actually feels heard, because I'm listening from the speaker's frame of reference, not from my own frame of reference. The minute I use an I statement,
Ah, I see.
now I'm speaking from my frame of reference. It's my agenda. I'm in control. As long as I use you, I'm reflecting your experience from your frame of reference, and people never feel offended. In fact, they're happy to have you do what you do. And occasionally you'll get pushback. Sometimes somebody will say, "Who the hell do you think you are, my psychotherapist?" All that means is that you were too good, you were too efficient, because you blasted through their defenses and walls that they've got to protect themselves, like you're a superhero, and you were just a little too good at it, and it scared them, and so they reacted with a fear reaction. Go away.
Back, right.
Yeah. All that means is you got to just come back at them 15 minutes later and be a little bit more nuanced and subtle, not be so aggressive about it. But that's the only kind of negativity that anybody ever gets. Is every now and then they'll get a little bit of pushback, and it's just an indicator you did a good job, just too good. Back off.
So how does this translate to salesmen or business owners, or actually more importantly, I think but to a leader? I would assume that this would be a very important skill set for a leader to be able to master, and especially the
foundational. So we can take a look at a bunch of different perspectives, but let's just take general leadership.
Okay.
We're on a virtual world today, or a hybrid world where it's partly virtual, partly in person. And God only knows when the next pandemic is going to erupt. So this is straining our old capacity.
Okay.
The first thing that I do is when I'm looking at a team, I immediately am assessing emotions. I'm letting that part of my brain that can read emotions automatically. I'm just reading all the emotions in the room. I'm taking the temperature of the room, but I'm doing it systematically and finding out where I think people are at. And that may or may not modify what I have to say or how I'm going to say it.
Okay.
And then what I do, there are a whole bunch of different things leaders have to do, but basically my job is to create emotional safety. So in any team that I lead, the most important skill that I bring to the room is creating emotional safety so that nobody feels put down, criticized, judged, ridiculed, or humiliated. Fundamentally, leaders provide 3 psychological services to groups. Number 1, they provide focus. Number 2, they provide direction. And number 3, they provide safety. And if you don't provide those 3 functions as a leader, you're not leading, you're doing something else, and you'll fail. So safety is, in my opinion, safety is paramount, because people are already coming into a business environment feeling emotionally unsafe because they've never felt emotional safety before in their lives. They grew up emotionally invalidated. They grew up in a socially competitive environment where put-downs were the way of life, and so they've never been allowed to be their authentic selves. And because we put this high premium on rationality, 98% of who they are gets left at the door when they walk in the office. Well, I wanted to bring 100% to the office, so I want those emotions here, and I'm going to model the behaviors that I want, and I'm going to create emotional safety. And there are a whole bunch of different skills and techniques you use for creating emotional safety. I'm going to provide that direction and focus, and then I'm going to sit back and let people do their thing, and just monitor progress. And if there's emotion or conflict, then I'm going to jump right in and I'm going to take care of it. I'm going to help people get through it. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to ignore it, and I'm not going to get angry about it. These are human beings with feelings.
Yeah.
I have to have deep compassion for them.
So obviously, go ahead. My apologies.
No, that's all right. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I was going to say, emotions are really the driving force of any successful person. In my opinion, the most successful people are really the ones that have the highest drive, or the ones that have the highest level of emotional intelligence. Is that fair to say?
No, that'd be fair to say. Emotional intelligence isn't something you learn. It's a test. It's a measure.
Okay.
So anybody who says they can teach you emotional intelligence is blowing smoke.
Okay.
What you really want to learn are emotional competencies. And what I've learned is that the fastest way to become emotionally competent is to learn how to affect label, which is a form of cognitive empathy. When you develop that skill, everything else falls into place automatically. It's amazing how quickly 4 to 6 weeks, and you can completely change.
So when you say
So you're right.
affect
So take,
labeling, sorry, that's not something I don't think I've really truly understand. So when you're referring to affect labeling,
this is the 3-step process we talked about,
okay,
where
okay,
we
okay,
ignore the words, read the emotions, reflect back the
right,
emotions.
okay, okay, got that.
The technical name, yeah, the technical name for that skill
Okay,
is affect labeling
affect
or
labeling.
reflecting
Okay,
emotions. So let's take a real estate profession, since you provide a platform for real estate people. An agent is meeting with a
a home shopper.
couple,
Yeah.
yeah, let's say a home seller, and you want to get the listing. So rather than touting how great you are, all you're going to do is tell me what's going on in your life. And they'll start telling you. You don't have to say why you're selling your home. Just tell me what's going on in your life. And as they speak, the only thing you do is reflect back their emotional experience.
Huh.
Because people sell homes for 4 reasons, right? Death, divorce,
Birth.
maybe they gotta move, or maybe they're lucky and they making more money and they can upgrade. Those are the only 4 reasons. So three of those can be traumatizing. Only one of them is kind of exciting. So you have to recognize that oftentimes there are really negative emotions around selling a home. Homes are, as most all real estate people know, have a huge amount of emotion wrapped around them.
Probably the biggest asset that has the most emotion wrapped around it.
It's
Yeah.
it's the biggest financial asset, and outside of a marriage or partnership itself, it's the biggest emotional
Yep.
asset.
Yep.
So doesn't it make sense that if you're a real estate professional that you want to master emotions? Because that's what this business is all about.
Yeah. I mean, it makes
You would
total sense.
I've taught sales teams how to do this, and you spend the first half hour and you don't say a word other than to reflect back the emotional experience of the homeowners. And by the time you're done with that, they'll sign anything you want. Because they feel heard and understood
Right.
and validated.
Right. What are some, I guess, practices or strategies that you can implement to really become a master at this? I mean, one, other than working with a coach, right? And it's something that I always recommend is always work with a coach and someone who, knows more
Right.
than you. There's always something to learn. But what are some of the practices that you could put into play that help with
So,
mastering this?
of course, I don't listen to the radio or watch television,
Right,
but I know
step
that
one.
people do. And so you might as well use it as a training tool. So one of the things you can do is when you're watching Netflix or you're watching a movie on your screen, turn the volume off, take out a piece of paper, and write down every emotion
Wow.
you see for 3 minutes.
Wow.
If you want a speed test, you're listening to the radio in your car. List every single emotion in a 20-second spot.
How many emotions do you
Just pay attention to the emotions, and you'll be amazed at how many emotions they cram into 20
That's what I was
seconds.
going to ask. How many emotions do you think one would go through in the 20
10
seconds?
to 15 emotions, depending on the ad and the spot and what's being sold. But yeah, usually it's 10 to 15. And when you do that, what you're doing is you're waking up this innate ability to read emotions.
Okay.
Now, to practice the hard part, which is reflecting back emotions, that is the hardest part because it's so counterintuitive to everything we've been taught about how to talk to people. I tell people to start off in very low risk social situations. My favorite laboratory is Starbucks.
Okay.
You go into Starbucks, you're gonna give your order to the barista, take in your credit card, and you say, "Hey, you're really happy today," because most of the time they are. And then what you do is you put your unless it's one of the shops where they're unionizing, you put your metaphorical white lab coat on, and just observe what is the reaction to this person when I just told them they were happy.
Mm-hmm.
And you do this over and over and over again. You do it with baristas in Starbucks or other coffee shops. You do it in restaurants with your restaurant servers. You do it at the supermarket with a checkout person. Any stranger. Read their emotions and give them a 1 or 2 word emotional reflection and watch what happens. The observation is the most important. And over time, literally weeks, you will see the same thing. You get the same reaction every single time. You get a big smile, you get a nodding of the head, you'll get a thanks and gratitude. because you have validated their existence. Once you have confidence now that, hey, this might work, then you can go a little deeper into the pool and try that on your friends and maybe your business colleagues carefully.
Keyword.
And then if you got small children or grandchildren, 6 to 8 years old, 4 to 8 years old, they'll eat this up. Try it on them. If you got a dog or a cat, good on. It works really well on dogs and cats. Not that they understand, but they are so loving that it gives you the ability to get the sequence down. You are. The last place you start working is in your intimate relationships. I really discourage people from bringing this into a marriage, for example, because it's instant intimacy at a very deep level, and many marriages are not ready for that. So, and then of course the workplace, and you practice it, and literally within 4 to 6 weeks, most people have mastery of this.
So how would my life change, or how would my day-to-day change when I start to master this and start to implement it in my relationships?
You're the CCO of Set Schedule, as I understand it.
Yes.
So you're a pretty high level executive. You will become a leader that everybody wants to follow. Everybody will want a piece of Daniel. You will have compassion for people instead of resentment. Fights and arguments in your world will go away forever. You will never see another fight and argument again. And if there's a fight and argument between other people who are not involved with you, you will have the ability to step in
I like that.
and stop those fights and arguments. Anybody who's angry or upset or highly emotional will never bother you. You will never feel anxiety around emotions again. You will never feel anything but compassion for people who are experiencing strong emotions. You will become emotionally competent and emotionally aware, it's a positive feedback cycle. So you'll just get getting stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. Your kids will love you because they feel heard for the first time in their lives. Your spouse will ultimately really feel connected to you, although that takes a little bit more work. There is just nothing bad that happens from this. That's why I say it's the foundational skill of life.
I feel like I'm gonna try this out a little bit more consciously than I ever have. It seems like again, fundamental is a very grounded word for me, and to use that word with after the last 40 minutes that we spent, I think is a clear indication that it's something that if humanity had a little bit of a better grasp of, we'd probably be in a little bit of a better place in general.
I am absolutely convinced. And remember, I'm a lawyer. I'm a skeptic.
Right.
I'm not some tree hugging thing, sing kumbaya around the campground kind of person.
Right.
I mean, we talk about peacemaking. We're talking about hardcore, difficult, intractable conflict, where people would rather kill each other than talk. That's the work that I do. But I have seen this change lives in really, really dramatic ways, and I'm convinced that if every parent could start reflecting back their children's emotions at 2 or 3 years old, we wouldn't have prisons in 20 years.
What would be an example, or what would be the most impactful conflict that you mediated, or one that will last with you forever? If you don't mind sharing.
I've done so many conflicts, they all kind of blur. I mean, I've done probably the largest monetary conflict I did was a $500 million real estate partnership breakup, commercial real estate breakup, where the 4 partners, 3 of them were lawyers and one of them was a real estate guy. And they hated each other's guts. And they were in litigation spending $100,000 a week in legal fees. We got that one resolved. Some of them are poignant. There was another case, an engagement. This was non-litigated, and these days I do mostly non-litigated cases. There are plenty of mediators out there that can do litigated disputes. But this was a case where it was a family business up in Central California, big ag family, very big, very well known, one of the biggest in California. And there were 3 brothers running the various businesses. Dad was pretty much retired. and one of the brothers, all in their 40s, embezzled $200,000 from the business. And it was discovered by the other two brothers, and they just went crazy, as brothers do when this sort of thing happens. And ultimately, we were able to get a complete reconciliation and put the family back together again.
Wow.
And today they're even more profitable than they were back then.
Wow.
So you see things like that, and it makes the work worthwhile. It's not easy, but it is very satisfying.
Some of us struggle to keep the peace amongst friends, let alone
Yeah.
someone that you have any kind of animosity against or negative feeling towards. It's so easy to just fall in that trap of
That's right.
F
And,
this person, I don't want them, like they're good for nothing, just get them out of my life and move on.
and social media doesn't help, and the political polarization that we have doesn't help, and the fact that we
Yeah.
don't have any good political role models that are modeling. Think about it. The politicians that we have today that we hear about, but from local all the way up to national, are they leading us to a higher place in our lives? Hell no. They're taking us down as deep as they can possibly get us, because all they're trying to do is protect their power position and privilege. And I'm sorry, I don't accept that. And I don't think any person in this country who believes in the values that America stands for should accept that either. And I don't care what your political persuasion is. If your politician is not leading you to a higher place and modeling for you the kind of behavior that you want your kids to follow, and modeling deep values that everybody shares, then that person shouldn't be in office.
That's powerful.
And I don't care what the party is.
That's
And
powerful.
I just wish more people could start thinking about that, because then maybe we'd have a different outcome in both in Sacramento and in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, that's a powerful statement. And again, coming from someone who is so educated and so experienced, has so much, I guess, just the wealth of knowledge that you bring, Doug, is really one that I don't feel, I hope a lot of people hear this and even take one decision to make one act. And it sounds like if they take one act of, and I have, I'm from my side, I always try to take something from these interviews, because again, when I sit in front of someone such as yourself, it's very humbling and honoring, and I'm going to definitely be much more conscious about being aware of my the person that I'm talking to, their emotions and what they're going through. I'm going to try to do the affirmation, the emotional affirmation that you've spoken about today. So thank you for that. Really, thank you.
You're welcome. I was going to say, I've got a web page that I created for your audience.
Okay.
If people are interested in learning more about the work, they can go to dougnoll.co/mindset.
Whoa.
And that page is only for your audience.
Okay.
And they can get a free ebook which kind of describes all of this stuff. They can also get a copy of my book, De-Escalate, and I've got a couple of video courses
That's
at
awesome.
different levels.
I was
that
about to
people-
get into the best way to connect with Doug. What would that be? And the website is?
Yeah, dougnoll.co.mindset. My email address is doug@dougnoll.com. And I'm a solopreneur. I don't have a staff. I don't have secretaries or virtual assistants or
So
anything.
communication
I'm all
should go
by
straight to
myself.
you.
That's why I live on 10 acres in the central Sierra Nevada.
That's got to be an interesting. I mean, how engaged are you with people around you then? If 10 acres seems like a lot.
Not to engage with. We see our neighbors every now and then, but they have a different mindset than I do. So we all respect each other and keep our distances. But the virtual reality that we find ourselves in today as a result of the pandemic has been a boon to my business and my work, because I can be here. I've got super high speed internet, and I can connect with anybody in the world. This morning at 7 a.m. I gave a 1 hour lecture to a whole bunch of lawyers and mediators in India, all over India and Pakistan.
Wow.
You couldn't do that 5 years ago.
No. Wow. So you still
know?
practice, or I mean, do you practice at all now, or is it just a lot
I
of
don't
all
practice.
coaching and
I
training?
don't practice law. I still take on mediations and arbitrations as they come my way, but my life is really devoted to teaching people the skills that we've been talking about, because that's where I think I can do the highest and best good. And of course, I'm still very active in the prison project.
That's amazing. We're coming to the end. If there's one, I guess, piece of advice you can give someone who really wants to start to dive in and learn about this, other than connecting with you? What would be something you would leave them off with?
Start, I'm going to use your terminology. There's a
Sure.
mindset here. Mindset. We're 98% emotional and only 2% rational. Get that insight. If you can get that insight, everything changes. Because when you see people who are emotional, you're no longer judging them on the standard of rationality and you're saying, oh, they're just irrational, they're being idiots. Instead, you say, oh, they're just emotional, and I know how to deal with that. I understand what I'm seeing here. This isn't chaos or confusion. This is normal human behavior. And once you get that insight, all of a sudden, the rage and the irritation and the anger, it all goes away because all you do is have compassion for people who are being emotional. And if you study the tools, then you have the tools to deal with it. And life is no longer upsetting or stressful. It's understandable. What looked like chaotic, confusing, crazy behavior now is perfectly understandable and predictable. Oh, I get it. I've seen this before. No big deal. I know exactly what to do. That's a very grounding place to be in when you can do that.
Definitely. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's going to be my takeaway. Well, Doug, again, thank you so much for joining. This was really an enjoyable experience for me. The website, one more time, you said it was, what was it?
So the page it's a bit.ly link.
Okay.
That goes to the page link, and the URL is dougnoll.co/mindset.
And we'll put it in the description, and
Yeah.
obviously we'll put
My
all
web-
your handles and.
My website address is dougnoll.com.
Okay.
And my email is doug@dougnoll.com. I'm really easy to get a hold of.
Sounds
So,
like it. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us, Doug, and we
Thank you.
appreciate your time. And we'll catch everybody on the next Mindset podcast. Take care.